Good morning and welcome to part 2 of Waking Up to the Noble Journey. And the reminder of the subheading, Imagination, Wonder, and Spirituality in a Quantum Reality. And what I love about that title is there's a little secret hidden inside that, which is we're not talking about imagination and spirituality once you get into a quantum reality, or once you enter a quantum reality. The end is you're already there. We're already there. So there's no getting in or out of it. And for you that might be good news, and for some of you that might be bad news. But here we are. Last week, I want to review a little bit, or we want to review a little bit of last week. Just to connect with where we've come from, we opened up last week with a conversation about the idea of simulation, and that we might be living in the midst of some sort of simulation, a construct we might call it, that has helped. And that construct, come on in, that construct has all kinds of origins, and I know on my best, most gracious days, I'm very, I think you are as well, Don, very kind of understanding about how those constructs have been formed, and gracious about that. On my most pessimistic days, I'm grumpy about that construct because it's perpetuated by power structures and all that jazz. The constructs we discussed last week, good to see y'all. The constructs that we discussed were this idea of the kind of progression of reality, or how we think about reality over time, right? So this idea of a kind of a top-down reality, where there's this mythic someplace else, and then we might be living in here. We called that Platonic inspired idea of an ideal up here and we're down here, and then it became a top-down where there's a command and control center construct. Some of that also has, if you'll remember, the connections and speed bumps along the idea of the pre-Copernican understanding of the universe, that prior to Copernicus and Galileo, the Earth was the center of the universe, and the human beings were the center of the Earth. So we were the most dominant species and the most dominant planet, which is the center of everything. But then science poked holes in that, and observation poked holes in that idea that we might be in a heliocentric universe. But then further studies said it's not even our universe. We are in one solar system in multiple universes, and that there might be multiple universes, which then kind of radically altered the language systems that we all had been using, and that philosophy and religion had been using. We also talked a little bit last week about what happens when you go from that idea to the Newtonian world idea, which is pretty wonderful, this idea of a law, a world that is lived according to laws, and those laws have some predictability and rigidity. And in that world, we might find some safe refuge where we can understand that up is up and down is down, and fast is fast and slow is slow, and everything kind of proceeds in this very predictable kind of fashion, which is helpful. That can lead us to a sense of, or kind of feed into that existing sense of duality, where we start saying that not only are we living in a world where we have laws, but we're also living in a world where those laws mean that this is right and this is wrong. That physics idea becomes a philosophical idea, that we start saying in and is in and out is out, or right is right and wrong is wrong, and sin is sin, and righteousness is righteousness. And that kind of dualistic thinking then becomes permeating all around us. Which is a great way to live until it doesn't work any longer, because then over time you start recognizing that there's more nuance and gray, and what do we do next? We kind of teased the idea of Einstein. That's right, we got into Einstein, where he kind of opened this idea of different understandings of reality and different understandings of time. But Einstein didn't even understand what was going to come with this idea of quantum reality as well, and then unfolding this understanding of quantum, understanding of it, or revelation of the way things are, that there isn't necessarily a Newtonian universe that we're living in. We might be living in a universe where time doesn't go from here to here. Time goes from here everywhere, and maybe that duality that we lived within is more a whole idea. And that there might not be as much predictability as there might be an unfolding, and a discovery. So that was the review we did last week. That's what we did last week. Anything I missed or left out? I know I've reviewed that very quickly.
We're going to have discussion later. So hold your questions
Hold
for
your
the last
questions.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm going to add a little to this. So we talked about we live in a simulation, and this whole 4 weeks is about imagination. We use our imagination to actually create a simulation within the simulation, which is our projected notion of who we are, what the world we're in is about, and we're driven to have consistency. We want things to fit in with the way that they've been and the way that we think they're going to be. And something that doesn't fit in with that, we either reject as an anomaly or try to get away from it or go running back to the familiar. So I mentioned a little bit about a scientist named William Tiller who has done a lot of research on subtle energy, and he showed that whenever subtle energy has an interaction with what he calls ordinary space or reality, it changes the properties, so now things are possible that weren't possible before. And you might be thinking, well, what in the world does that have to do with spirituality? It has everything to do with spirituality, because anytime we have an experience in which we feel we're really present, we're really in a deep relationship with whatever it is that we are experiencing, then we are bringing subtle energy to that circumstance, and we're opening up possibilities that weren't there before. And we've all had times like this, beautiful places in nature, listening to beautiful music, seeing an amazing work of art, listening to poetry, watching dance, looking at a baby smiling, something that just takes us out of the simulation we've been in, and we go, wow, this is really wonderful. But then we tend to immediately constrict and go into our thoughts about what we've experienced. So today we thought we would do some practices so we can begin to have some experiences of what is this like, but also to show that it's very close for us to make the little turn to be in this quantum reality that we're already in, which is an interconnected reality. It's where time doesn't work the way that we thought it did. We're just in this little tiny slice of the present, and here's the past, and here's the future, where things have an effect instantaneously across space. This has been shown many times in physics, which Einstein rejected quantum physics because he called it spooky action at a distance. And he said, yeah, and he said, God doesn't play dice. Well, guess what? God's a big-time gambler. We're the gamble of God creation, because God didn't know what was going to be and couldn't, because this was an experiment. We are in a living, ongoing experiment called existence. And we can, and we can participate in how that existence unfolds instead of just being in the same old story that we think is going to be. Okay, well, enough background and framework and theory. Let's have some experience. So what's something that we do all the time, 24 hours a day? Breathe. So I gather each of you is breathing right now, at least I hope so. If you're not, have someone call 911 for you. You need to get some help. So, and we talked about being present, and we talked a little bit last week about being present is more than just being physically here. You all are physically present, but there's probably various degrees of how present you are. Some of you are thinking about things later in the day or yesterday or a worry you have or maybe something you're looking forward to, and that's human nature, but we want to just try to bring things right to the now. Okay? So close your eyes and we begin with simple awareness. Sometimes in spirituality we think we need to do all these complicated practices and all mystical, esoteric terminology and symbols and so on, and there's a lot to be said for that. That's been developed over thousands of years, but it's not necessary in order to experience what we're aiming at in this series. So just begin by becoming aware of your breath without trying to change it. Just feel it coming in and feel it going out. And we usually think of what happens when we breathe as just, okay, we're taking in oxygen, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. Yes, that's the tiniest aspect of what's happening with each breath. But the mystics say that with each breath, we're also taking in prana, life energy, from all of existence. And it's a physical fact that with each breath, we're breathing in photons that have come from stars that started billions of years ago. The stars might not even exist anymore, but that light is reaching us. And we're not only breathing in light that's in the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, we're breathing in all aspects of energy from space, life energy. So just begin by opening to the awareness that you are breathing in life energy and feel it circulating through your body, especially to any place that's tense. And just allow it to gently penetrate into those areas and rejuvenate areas that seem to be cut off or very low key. And it's not any effort to this, it's just a natural phenomena. Simple awareness of this process increases the effect of what's going on. And as you exhale, it's also a demonstrated fact that we emit photons. That's been measured. Photons come out even from our cells, cells that emit light. And when we're aware of this, the amount of light that's emitted from our being increases. So feel you are breathing in light with each breath, all frequencies of light, including subtle frequencies of light that you can't perceive with the usual senses. So now you're bringing subtle energy into your being. And guess what? This subtle energy is now changing the possibilities of what you can experience in your being, including your consciousness. And now as you exhale, you're not just a mirror for this light. This light has been transformed by the uniqueness of who you are. So something's been added to it that goes back out, and it goes out every which way. If you think about it, so if light's emitted from our being, then it's emitted at 186,000 miles per second in every direction. Imagine like a sphere of light going out into space. And now imagine your age multiplied by however many seconds that is. It's trillions and trillions and trillions of miles into space. The light of your being has reached out that far. And what's been changed in you from the interaction of the light that you receive. Okay, so this is, you're probably feeling something already. This is a good starting point. But now, instead of having our imagination be something that further constricts us within the simulation, it can be something that opens up something that wasn't there before. So, we can put different thoughts on our breath, and we can experience what changes with that. So, let's begin with something very simple. So just imagine the blue sky, deep blue sky, vast, clear blue sky. And feel what shifts in your being, physically, and mentally, and emotionally, as you just hold this image of the deep blue sky. So we're having a little subtle energy tasting experience right now. So we're going to have little samples, and you can go back and feast on any of these you like later on. So now imagine a clear stream of water flowing. And see what that does to your energy. And not only that, sense the energy in the room as we all are tuning into the same image together. The atmosphere of the entire room changes, and all we've done is shifted our imagination to have a focus of consciousness on, in this case, the stream. So now let's put in a word. Let's put in love. So focus on your heart and just think of love. And think the word, if you like, as you breathe in love. Breathe in love, breathe out love. And now think of peace. And if you like, you can think the English word peace, or you could think shalom or salam. Once again, notice the atmosphere in the room. And because we live in an interconnected reality, the effects of what we're doing don't just stop at the walls of this room. They permeate all of existence. Even what seems to us to be in the past or the future. Distance doesn't matter. So I mentioned last week the effect of one person joining a group that are in sync with each other, that the effect of that one person more is not just one. Let's say there's 100 people that are focused on the same intention and one more comes along, it's you. It's not just you've added 1/100th to the system. The effect is 200 times as strong as individuals acting separately. That's how much has been added from one more person. Now imagine millions of people praying for peace, especially in places like Ukraine and Israel and Gaza. And sometimes we wonder, what can we do? Well, we can have a very powerful effect that transcends anything we could possibly do as a separated, isolated individual in a dualistic state of consciousness. And I think I may have shared a story last time that I was on a 2-week retreat in the high desert, a Sufi retreat back in the early 80s, and we were in silence. This is with my teacher, Pir Balayat, and he interrupted the usual of the retreat and said that he felt he had to say something, because this is when the war between Israel and Palestine had begun. I think it was the 8 Days War, or however many days it was. And he said, here we are meditating in blissful states, but let's do something and let's just focus on peace. And we all did that, and the war ended the next day. I'm not saying we did that, but there were probably millions of people around the world doing that, and we added our intention to that. So we can't necessarily magically fix the world's problems all of a sudden by holding an intention, but we sure can have a very powerful effect.
And the way we talk about this in divine liturgy is presence. 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 That it is possible that we might, as we gather ourselves in community, align our energies, align our hearts, carried along by song and by invitations to further deepen our intentions, to manifest that which is seemingly impossible in the presence of the gathering. The first time you and I talked about this, I just about came out of my skin, Don, because the language that you describe, or that you use right there to describe that, is the way the church describes the Eucharistic liturgy and the mystery of what happens in sacramentality. In fact, the way in which the church has traditionally, for centuries, described the mystery of the Eucharist is not transubstantiation. It's a very technical term. The way the church has described it is only best translated as real presence. That there is a real presence, impossible presence, in the mystery of that sacrament. So when we gather together, as you described, often close our eyes in prayer, or often stand up, or often kneel, and then walk. We're aligning all of our energies to help the real presence happen in a space where it would be impossible to say that the real presence is there, except the experience of the gathered proclaims the real presence is there, right? I think that's important for me to say as a priest, that the language that we're sharing here can sound sometimes unique, novel, or divorced from what might be considered classic Western Christianity or classic Christianity in the world. And my contention, and in conversation with you, what we've discovered in conversation, and what not just us, this is not novel, in fact this has been going on forever, is that there is tremendous link-up in the ways in which we are discussing this, and in the ways mystical thinkers and mystical practitioners have been experiencing divine presence. And all we've been trying to do is create frameworks that name it. One of the problems when we create frameworks that name the mystery is that we become very attached to the framework and not the mystery. So then what the church did when it experienced real presence, when Jesus of Nazareth, however you might make claims about who Jesus was, there is an event recorded in a common story that this great teacher, preacher, prophet, mystic took wine and took bread and said, body and life force, blood, is here. And what the church did is build a structure around that to isolate that and create doctrines around it, rather than lean into the mystery that truly is at hand, which is that when my life force is aligned with another's life force, I am fed. And that feeding, as you just described, is not isolated to this geography. It actually spreads out beyond geography. So then Paul, writing later, says, I am with you. Even while he's in jail in Rome, he says, I am with you in the breaking of the bread. I am with you. He's tapping into that same idea that though we might be geographically separate, our energies can align in such a way that we might be cosmically, quantumly intertwined, and might not only be so in a nice way, but might be so in an effectual way to make that which seems impossible become manifest. Right? Become manifest. What you described right there as well, and part of this is part of what Don and I do, what you and I do together, which is wonderful, is as you describe that quantum entanglement and that affecting the energies and that subtle energy affecting at a distance, I just want to remind everybody that's the classic claim that we make in most religious traditions of the power of intercessory prayer. We do it every Sunday. Lest we think that this is so woo-woo, this is the most practical manifestation of a lived faith that the church has known and that religious traditions have known forever. You're going to hear it today, by the way, in the Old Testament lesson. and you read it all the way through the Psalms, and you look at Job, look at all the stories, people are aligning their energies and saying, can we make the impossible happen? And can we make that happen and manifest that in our imaginations, in our dreams? And can we plead with God for some uniting way for us to be able to heal, or to find peace, or to find a home, or to have nourishment, or to have water? Isn't that great? There's more linkages here that we're discovering, and for which I'm very, very grateful.
Well, it reminds me in mystical Judaism, there's four realms of reality, and the one prior to there being manifestation is like the divine imagination. It's like the thoughts of what possibilities could be, but they're not definite. They're not carved in stone. They're just kind of like starting points. But the only way that they can come into actuality is through beings in manifestation, that we are the ones that bring something that started with the divine imagination into existence, but we're not just this hollow pipe and, okay, comes through. We transform that in a unique way, just like an artist transforms an inspiration, a musician transforms an idea for a composition, or a poet, or any kind of creative activity, that we have a lot to do with what comes through from that.
I want to pause right there and also say a little bit about your practice that you lovingly called us into with the breath, which I've done that with you probably, 6 times? I love that. You do that so well. So thank you. And also, attend to the possibility that we might want to draw a fixed idea around how to access that is called breath. Okay? What you're describing is how to open ourselves into the reality of all realities. And that way, one practice to do that is through breath. But it's not the only practice, is it?
No, living is a practice.
Right? That's really important. So lest you say, I can't breathe right now, I can't get present in the deepest reality of all realities. Well, okay, so you can't breathe right now. Okay, what's next? Maybe what can your eyes see? Or one practice that many traditions use is water. I don't know if you realize how many water practices there are around the world, that multiple religious communities around the world have had rituals around water. And Christianity has classic ones as well. Anybody walk into church and feel compelled when you walk past the little dish of water, or perhaps the baptismal font, to dip your hand in that font and make the sign. That's a water ritual. The way that we spray water at certain times during the year, or, well, let's be very clear, we're not only talking about the water in the church, we're talking about the water in your morning bath. Might that be the primordial waters at the beginning of all waters? And might that remind us every time we take a little bit of water in a cup, or walk into the Gulf Coast, into the Gulf, and remind ourselves that we're in the midst of water of all waters. And like breath, there's no creating more water. It's all endlessly cyclical water, so that the water that is in me will be the water that is in you. The water that is in the ancient of times is the water that is in the present and future of times. And that might be a way for us, or for you, for a practice to connect with that infinitude that is the mystery that we're talking about here. So breath and water, living, eyesight. You and I both do it with photography.
Yeah.
This idea of seeing and understanding light, and how light might teach us something.
So spirituality, Hazrat Khan, who brought Sufism to the West, said that spiritual awakening is a matter of changing the point of view.
Yeah.
You think, well, wait a minute, you've got to do years and years of this and that, and maybe go to this place and be with some great teacher to have awakening. It's the littlest turn of your perspective. So here's a simple example that's in the, let's say you're in a boat and you see someone on another boat and they crash into you. You're angry. Well, they must be drunk. They weren't watching where they were. But then you learn later that they had a seizure. They were unconscious. Now you shift from anger to compassion. What's changed? Your perception of what the situation was about, and freeing yourself from the preconceived notion of the way that things were. Okay? So I like to say that everything is potentially a portal, an opening to the sacred. Everything, no exception. Doesn't mean, and there's horrible situations, plenty of them going on right now, but what I'm saying is your relationship to what's going on, to that circumstance, can open up something that wasn't there before, that now brings new possibilities to come. And it maybe it's opening up to compassion, it's opening up to seeing the deeper understanding beyond just what you thought you knew about what was going on. So we can do that every waking moment, especially when we get caught up in circumstances. And so the reminder that we have built in, and the reminder does a very good job, although we don't usually listen to it, is when we start reacting to something. Get me out of here, or that. And as soon as you catch yourself doing that, take a breath. Okay. What else is going on? And then in the big scheme of things, sometimes when I was in my psychology practice and people were really stuck on something, it could be an old resentment or whatever, I'd say, the physicists say that I think it's, just make up a number, 10 to the 20th years, the last proton in the universe will decay and there'll be nothing but a kind of a sea of subatomic particles. And when that happens, how concerned do you think you're going to be about this? Not very much. We'll save our comments for later, if you would. So even that, just going, okay, this seems like the worst thing, and, but you open up to a bigger perspective. And sometimes it's, well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, maybe that worst thing is a pretty bad thing, but maybe that's not the worst thing that there is. Especially if we believe that there's something that continues in us, and physicists are starting to believe that there must be something that persists with consciousness, because they're saying information can't be destroyed. And so all the information that composes our being, when the physical body goes, well, where does that go? Does it just get deleted like old computer hard drive? No, it doesn't. That information is still present throughout all of existence. Okay, so we can shift our perspective to what's going on. And back to presence, when we become presence in the way that Jonathan and I have been talking about, and hopefully you've had some experience with the little practices that we did, and you feel things really opening, then recognize that that's an emergent experience. It's not, okay, now I've got it, I've moved into the room where presence is happening, check, okay, now I'll just watch the show go on. No, that presence is continually emerging, it's refreshed, you are changed, whatever you're in experience with is changed, and the relationship between you and that is changed. I'm on this little site called Quora where people ask questions of different knowledgeable people. So if someone said, how come the sun illuminates the earth, how come space isn't all lit up like the earth? And they pointed out, and they refrained from saying, who was their scientist? No, they didn't say that, but they said that light itself is not visible. It's only visible when it interacts with something like dust. If you have if you could have a shoebox that had a vacuum in it, and you put a flashlight here, and it had like a hole, and you could look out the other end, you could look into it, you wouldn't see a thing. So that light that started with existence, and that light was not the physical light that we see, it was a light that we can't even begin to describe, but it contained within it all the possibilities that could emerge. But if we think, the Sufis say that creation happened because God was a hidden treasure desiring to be known. Well, God could only be known if God can see something. Well, God can only see something if that light interacts with something. Guess what? Not just you, everything in existence, and not just this realm, all the subtle realms, angels, archangels, or whatever. The experience is how that light is transformed through everything that's a part of creation. And we are participants, and we can consciously augment that process by an awareness of that. We can, if you're in a room where the energy is really bad and people are arguing and at odds, you can just center your breath and concentrate on just opening to the light emerging in that. And perhaps you'll feel a little chain reaction taking place. The atmosphere will change. You've brought an opening to new possibilities taking place, and you've opened, Jonathan was talking about intercessory prayer. So our normal way of thinking about prayer, which is well and good, someone's ill, we're sending them this energy. That's fine. But on a much deeper level, what's going on is we're experiencing a very deep connection with that person or a circumstance. It could be Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, or whatever. We're experiencing this deep interconnectedness. And now when we put an intention in the prayer and on the breath, it opens up the space of possibilities for what can, I like to say, it's suffusing into whatever we're praying for. Now it becomes available. And we can't force that onto anybody or anything, but if enough people begin to do that, then the atmosphere will change of the place.
Yeah, we might call that the relational real. I think that's important to say, that when we're talking about this idea of aligning energies, we're not talking about, or I'm not talking about, I don't think you are as well, and a vending machine. If we get enough people, we can tip the scales, right? If we can affect that to happen. Which I say vending machine because that actually is a model that many of us, at least I can say I grew up in. That if I'm righteous enough, if I'm good enough, if I say my prayers the right way, then that which I pray for will become possible. And that's kind of a performance-based vending machine idea. I think it's almost getting there, but not quite.
Newtonian prayer.
It's Newtonian prayer, right? And you can see how that works, right? Is that if you live the right way, then and if you follow the right set of laws, then you might be able to tip the scales, which are fixed, by the way, in that Newtonian universe. And then all life is about is tipping those scales in the way that they've been pre-described and fixed. That's prayer in the Newtonian universe. What we're talking about here is this idea of the real and the manifestation of the real, which is to say that when we're talking about this idea of presence or this understanding of what might be happening in this unimaginable manifestation that we're having, we might be tempted to say, well, that's your imagination, that's not real. It's important to unspool ourselves from the Newtonian thinking that says that and invite ourselves to say, maybe what we instead could say is that the only thing that is real is in the imaginal realm, that in the manifestation of our ideas, of thoughts, but not only ours, but in the energy generation of all that is, maybe that alignment of energy is what we're saying when we say real. And so our ideas, our thoughts, our experience of presence is not, as one person said, collective indigestion that just happened to happen on everybody. I was in a conference one day when somebody kind of said this idea of presence in the room is no more than collective indigestion. We might disabuse ourselves of the notions that we're making something happen. I didn't agree with them, of course, but I was rather amused by the idea. But it's not that. It actually is real. So when we experience this sense of aha, by the way, there is a Jewish word for this, the Shekinah, this kind of experiencing presence or experiencing glowingness that might happen when we breathe together or align ourselves together, that somehow the divine realm and the human realm, or we don't know that there is a divine experience or a human experience, it's all divine, it's all wrapped around together. That is real. And while it might be illusory, I think of it as relationally real, meaning so that just like a relationship with another person, just because I act the same way upon you or upon you or upon you the next day as I did the previous day, does not mean that your response will be exactly the same the next day and the subsequent day. Because we're not involved in a fixed universe, Newtonian, we're involved in a quantum universe where relationality matters. So just because I say to my wife, I really, really, really love your hair today, the response that I might get one day is not the same predictable response that I might get the next day. Because the next day, the response might be, you're just, what the hell are you talking? You said that yesterday, what's going on? Or you might say, you're making that up. Or somebody else might say something completely different. That's That's the power of relationality. Not predictability, but the unpredictability of it, which then calls us to be consistently present. So if you breathe, if you go home and breathe this afternoon, or we do it in a small group, you might not experience what we experienced right here. And that doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means it's relational. It's very real. So in that reality, then, we continue to open ourselves to the possibility, unpredictability of it. And if breathing doesn't work, or if water doesn't work, keep going. Try something else. And by the way, we're probably going to have to talk about what it means when we say work or not work. That's a kind of a Newtonian idea as well. This idea that it works or it doesn't work is an interesting question.
So in terms of, I think this term relational is so important, because if you think about it, the only way we know about anything is by virtue of our relationship with whatever it is that we're experiencing.
You just said that about the sun, about light itself. Right.
But usually we think of that relationship as something that's created in our mind. It's like our thoughts about whatever we were going to experience or what we're about to experience. So I'm thinking about, I'm sure we've all had this experience of, it could be a poem that you come back to, and the next time you read it, wow, I never saw this meaning in the poem. Or some sacred writing. Diane and I are big fans of Ibn Arabi, a Sufi that lived in the 1200s, and we have a dog-eared copy. I think Diane's on her second version because the first one started falling apart. Every time we read that, I mean, something will just jump out that we're understanding in a different way. Why is that? We're not the same person that read that before, and furthermore, what we're reading was meant to be, and I think this is true of any sacred writings, a portal, an opening to a deeper understanding of reality. It was a way of entering into something, but we tend to just get stuck on the words and parse them and diagram them and so on. But the same thing with icons or yantras or mandalas. You know, you look at a Buddhist mandala and you go, oh, well, it's very pretty. You have these Buddhists here, this must mean this or that. But if we really meditated on it, something would open up, and it wouldn't be the same thing each time. This reality that we're opening to is not fixed, right? Is not static. This is really important, and I know I'll be repeating this. Revelation is not a static experience. It may be ecstatic, but it's not an experience of something that was awaiting you in the Akashic records. So you finally got to this mystical state, and now you can perceive it. Revelation is something that has unfolded in the true nature of the deeper reality that was never there before and could not emerge except from the uniqueness of you in relationship with whatever it is you're experiencing. And guess what? This applies to any great being. If you're wanting to have an experience about Christ, hopefully you're not limiting that to just the historical Jesus and then just imagining, well, what would Jesus have said to me a couple thousand years ago? Pure Light would talk about the cosmic Christ, the cosmic nature of beings who've gone on from this world. What is emerging in a unique way in our experience with every single thing? Could be a bird. Some of you heard us tell this story. We got here early. Diane and I went to the jazz festival yesterday, and so we're listening to this wonderful group, and this grackle flies in. There's an empty chair, and just parks himself right on the back of the chair for about 5 minutes, looking up at the stage. I got a picture of it. It's like, wow, I mean, here's something that just knocks you out of your usual way of thinking about reality. You can imagine, Jonathan and Diane were talking about this earlier, well, what's the bird thinking or whatever? Well, I think the bird was enjoying the music, but whatever. Maybe he was looking. But it was like, it was an anomaly from ordinary experience. The things that wake us up, that shake us out of our usual conditioned thinking are anomalous. Right. And we tend to think of that anomaly as something that's not really real, but it sure was nice. I'd like to have another one. I got high. No, you got real for a little while, and then you came back to unreal that you think is real, that you're accustomed to, and now you're thinking about how wonderful this thing was. Well, we have the capacity of being in the real much, much, much more of the time in our lives, and it's not complicated. but we want to make it
Oh, but
complicated.
Don, make it more complicated, please.
Yes, I'm going to give you 3,000 mantras to recite for 5 years, and then
There we go.
Then-
We need more retreats.
that's right. Then you'll get. I guess we can stop.
Is it time?